So for those who are here and joining us virtually, welcome. This is the kickoff for our Honors Leadership Seminar series this year. And I can't think of a better person to kick it off with us than Leah Lizarrando. Leah is the co-founder and CEO of both 412 Food Rescue and Food Rescue Hero, and has a very impressive list of awards that she has received as a result of the impact of those organizations, which together have saved more than 100 million pounds of food that would have been wasted going into landfills, and gotten it to people who need it most. She's been recognized by Carnegie Mellon University, where she got her graduate degree, as one of their distinguished alumni in 2022. She has won the Vital Voices Global Leadership Award in 2020 and We Empower for the UN Sustainable Development Goals Challenge in 2019. She's been recognized as one of the 100 most influential leaders here in Pittsburgh, both by the Pittsburgh Business Times and City and State PA. And she was featured in a book featuring 100 of women who are using their power to empower women, with other very impressive women leaders like Melinda Gates and Greta Thunberg. And in March 2022, she was recognized for the GRIS 50, a list of emerging leaders who are having the biggest impacts around the world on climate change. So please join me in welcoming Leah to Chatham. So Leah, just to start out, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your own background, where you grew up, where you went to school.
Yeah. So I grew up in the Philippines and moved to New York City after college. I was working for a consumer packaged goods company and in product management. So my background is business. And then around that time, the first tech boom was happening. And I was really interested in this thing called technology. And so I left, my first kind of big girl job and moved to this small technology company that was in Connecticut, and was driving from Brooklyn to Connecticut every day for like 2 hours each way because I did not want to move to Connecticut. And then I went to Carnegie Mellon to do my master's degree at Heinz, where I learned about technology and public policy and really got interested in how we can use technology for public good. Went on to work as a consultant in tech, and then in 2014, 2015, kind of brought all of the work history that I've built up over the years to co-found 412 Food Rescue and Food Rescue Hero.
And tell us, where did the idea to go from being in tech, being in the private sector, what was it that drove you to set up these nonprofits and to tackle this particular problem?
Yeah, so the first big step of the journey was making the decision to move from corporate and for-profit into the nonprofit public sector world. And that decision was, difficult only largely because there was major economic implications. So I remember getting my first paycheck at my first nonprofit that I worked for, and I thought, wow, that's intense. That was a big, intense change. But really, I couldn't go back because what was really important to me was, and I did go back because of that shock. And I don't tell this story a lot, but I moved to the nonprofit public sector where I really couldn't understand the big difference in kind of financial situation, and moved back to consulting and really realized that I just can't work for a single bottom line, and really wanted my work to mean something for me to really do well and really commit myself to it. So I couldn't perform. Basically, I was going to work, I was miserable, and just really wanted, this may sound kind of rote, but really wanted some meaning in my career. And that really drove, this intense search for work that was both meaningful and financially rewarding. And, long story short, it was a journey in terms of understanding how to make impact in technology. and do very, very interesting things that were, in line with what was, what is now and what is cutting edge and what is new and fast moving, but also on the other side, making sure that, that world was creating something that was beneficial to society.
So how did you, within that broad domain of wanting to sort of do good and do well at the same time, have meaning, how did you settle on the problems of food waste and addressing hunger?
Yeah, so that one wasn't, I would say I didn't set out, okay, well, what I'm going to do now is solve food waste. That was more of an evolving thing. So in 2012, I read this report from the Natural Resources Defense Council. It's called Wasted. It is the NRDC's most downloaded report ever. And it was the first report that, made me aware. I think all of us are aware that we're wasting food. But it was the first report that made me aware that we were wasting almost half our food supply, which was a jarring number. And it was around that time that, and I have a lot of friends in the food world, and, started asking them about their own experience. And it came, they would tell me, I hate being on the last shift. We would go and do catering and we would throw everything out, and it didn't make any sense, especially because, we know that on the other side, there's so much food insecurity. Not only where I grew up, poverty is endemic in the Philippines. It's 60% poverty. But in America, poverty is kind of more hidden, right? But also what's jarring on the other side of that is that this is a country of so much excess. So there's this major disconnect. And, there was really a desire for me to understand, like, why is this happening? Why are we talking about feeding the 10 billion and all of the solutions are all about how do we make more food? When there is enough food, there's enough calories in the world that we produce to feed everyone 4 times over. 4 times over. So it becomes a distribution problem. And this is where I really say, like, this is where my education actually finally made sense, right? Because you go to school, you're questioning algebra, you're questioning all of the stuff that you're reading, and it doesn't make any sense. You don't see how you're going to apply it. And I think that was the time when, one of my favorite subjects was management science and operations research. I don't know if the business students here take that, but it's all about efficiency. And what happened in that kind of investigation of why food goes to waste is that, it's not a production problem that there's not enough food, it's a distribution problem. And then how do we then manage this distribution when this food has no value to anyone, no one's going to pay for it? And then on the other side, there's so many who need it who can't pay for it, even if they wanted to. And so you have to create this free distribution network. And then it became about how do you now do that? So it's a lot about logistics.
And so for those who haven't had a chance to actually participate or use the app, can you just give a quick summary of how it works?
Yeah, so it's basically the DoorDash for food surplus. And what we have is a technology platform that's an app, but it's the driver view of a DoorDash. It's not our view when we order food. And so all of our users are drivers. And basically what they see is what a DoorDash driver sees, where the food is and where it needs to be taken. And so, you basically, as a driver, sign on. And let's say you're on your way home and you have 20 minutes. You see that there's food right on your route. And you take that rescue, just like any driver for any of these delivery services. And you pick up the food and you drop it off and you're usually done in 20 minutes. And it sounds very simple, but it's the small movements, but scaled in many, 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 many hundreds of thousands of times that then translate to this 100 million pounds of food. So it's basically food waste happens because it's so small that you can't move it cost effectively. So you have to find a way to move it quickly and without cost, and be able to do it hundreds of thousands, millions of times.
So you came up with this sort of pressing dual need, and you obviously had the skills, the background for it. How did you go about then turning that into the first version that worked here in Pittsburgh,
Right.
and then think about scaling it more nationally? So building that organization and raising the money
Right.
to do it.
Yeah. So how many of you are thinking of your own ideas and businesses? One person. Well,
We're
it's
going to try to change that.
yeah. So it's basically sheer force of will, and I'm not, and a lot of, I think, first time entrepreneurs, who, don't come from a history of, family, entrepreneurship is that's what you do. You have an idea, you believe in it so much that there's no other way but to succeed. It's failure is not an option. And so it's all about tapping into every single node of my network, the people I knew, and learning from them and asking questions and just doing the next thing that, will lead to the next thing. And then, then in looking back, you see that, it's all these little steps that added up to this thing.
And so where did you get your seed capital? If you're starting a for-profit tech company, right? You go to venture capitalists or angel investors, but where did you get the backing for this idea?
Yeah, so you guys are in the city that has the second largest philanthropic giving in the United States. And we owe this to the Carnegies and the Mellons and the Hillmans. So this is a city that is ripe for funding, a lot of things that, ideas that, especially that are, with a social, aspect to it, or if you want to do something that will benefit society. So we basically pitched it to the foundations, and the Hillman Foundation was the first foundation that said, yes, we'll do it. And then credit Pittsburgh, that was a big risk. It's an app, which is, not something that you hear about in the nonprofit world all the time.
And when you started, you explained it as sort of the nonprofit DoorDash, but
right.
Was DoorDash around when you started?
Uber was around. Uber
right.
was big at that time. So we were using Uber at that time.
Yeah. So one of the challenges of building a successful nonprofit is the more success you have, the more money you need to raise, right? So you were able to leverage the great base of foundations we have here in Pittsburgh, but how did you go about then saying, okay, I've shown this can work here, now I want to take it to cities around the country, build that up?
Right. So my background is not in the nonprofit world. So I was always just uncomfortable with simply, fully being underwritten by philanthropy. So the goal really was not, when we launched it in Pittsburgh, the goal was always to scale it. And we knew that if it's technology that can work in one place, it can work everywhere. And so what we did was we started licensing the technology. And so that's, a big part, just like a university, a big part of it is also it's a cooperative, basically, what I call it, technology cooperative. And it's in 25 cities currently. And each of these nonprofits in these 25 cities that use it pay into the technology as a fee. So then it becomes kind of a self-sustaining nonprofit eventually.
Right. So their fees into the overall help to sustain the continued refinement. Now, if I understand the way the model works, you have a very user-friendly platform, but there's still a significant lift involved in signing up the food providers, the Trader Joe's, the Giant Eagles, the restaurants that are going to provide food, right? That people can then pick up, as well as the partners who are going to receive it, right?
Right.
Because you're not going to individual families, you're going to, so in each of those cities that licenses it, do you have a partner like the food bank or someone that has those relationships or is building them? How does that part happen?
Yeah, so in the beginning it was hard because it was a new thing and a new model, and food waste was, just kind of coming into consciousness. But 8 years later, it's not quite the same, where everyone now is aware of food waste. All of the food retailers and sources of food know that they can't just throw away food. Legislation is also catching up. California passed what's called SB 1383 that makes food waste illegal, to put it simply. And so as these kind of things gain momentum, the recruitment of people to actually as a source of food becomes much, much easier. And, it wasn't as challenging as it was before.
Right. And I think another innovative part of your model, in addition to your use of technology and helping to sustain it through the licensing, is you've come up with a lot of other offshoots that help address the issue of food waste, but also, I think, are probably also providing some of the revenue to help the organization grow. So I'm thinking of things like Upcycle and the Ugly CSA.
Yes. So we have all of these other, I hope some of you have heard of Imperfect Foods or Misfit Market, and these are grocery or produce delivery services that are large scale, national. They actually just merged, where they take seconds from farmers that they can't typically sell to a grocery chain because it's misshapen, and then they do it as a direct-to-consumer product. So we have some model that's like that. It's called the Ugly CSA, where we work with farmers, where we resell their seconds, and then So we also have a kitchen in Millvale that produces food, ready-to-eat meals from only surplus food. It's a kitchen that currently produces 1,000 meals a week with zero food cost and zero waste. So those are the tiny experiments that we have in terms of generating revenue from food that is going to be discarded.
And the Upcycle is also like partnering with private sector ones who figure out ways to integrate food that would be wasted into products.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, we have a big line. We work with almost all of the, at least a large number of breweries here in Pittsburgh that brew beer from bread. And that's, that's always something that we look forward to. We have releases of those beers because bread is the single most wasted food item in the Western world.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how many employees does Food Rescue Hero and 412 Food Rescue have now?
Right now we have about 40.
40 employees. Mm-hmm. So can you say a little about sort of your approach to leadership in terms of how you went about hiring those folks, choosing them, building the organization?
Yeah. So again, to my question earlier about ideas. So when I was in undergrad, I also did not think I was ever going to be an entrepreneur. Again, I was gunning for, I knew exactly what my career path was at that time. And in starting, a company, I think in the beginning, the hiring of people is very different. You basically hire your kind of initial band it's like your tribe. And there's no bureaucracy. It's startup, you're bootstrapped, everyone's doing everything. It's all about the mission. And I think as an organization evolves, then there's now layers, and the whole culture, begins to change, slowly. And if you have an organizational development class, pay attention because I didn't. And it's been such and people are your biggest asset. There's no, and people think that is it the technology, is that your big? No, the biggest asset is my team. And and focusing on the team is, I think, as a leader, one of the things that I have had to learn to do more and more of as the organization grew.
And in terms of thinking about sort of the continued growth of it and how you enable that, how have you gone about trying to both build your own capabilities? Because it's different leading that initial tribe with a
Right.
few people who you're all in the same, small space versus this bigger one that's now operating nationally. Have you been able to draw on mentors? Are there role models you've had, professional? How have you gone about sort of building your own capabilities and then the organizations?
Right. So mentors have been very important to me. I'm fortunate enough, one of my most valued mentors is this man, David Shapiro, who basically, he ran Giant Eagle, which if you've been here for a certain time, you know that that's the grocery store chain in Pittsburgh. And he was one of the first people who, when I said, this is what we're doing, because he's been in the industry for so long, completely understood. Because he's been living with food waste all his life without a solution. And so when we proposed the solution, then he jumped on it and basically said that this is what the industry has been waiting for. And truly valued at that point, he became one of our biggest investors and, generously gave his time to mentor me mostly about people. And truly that I wouldn't have been able to do, and we wouldn't have been where we are right now without his guidance. And there have been many mentors along the way. I think the other important thing is at a certain point, what's important is building your team, your core team, your leadership team, to be able to take care of the business as it is now. Because at some point also, your role evolves to thinking 2 years ahead. You're not anymore now, almost never. And a lot of my time in the last few years have been, trusting my team to execute what we've, designed and planned. And my time being spent on what is the world like next year? And what is the world like 2 years from now? And beginning to think about our path towards that.
I'm going to ask one more question now and then open it up for all of you to ask your questions. So in that journey, can you tell us what was the biggest challenge you faced in making this work, and how did you address?
I think the biggest challenge that we face is that, this model is an upstart in many ways. We are not a food bank. When we say we've distributed 100 million pounds of food, there are still funders who say, well, can we tour your warehouse? We saw none of that food. We have 0 facilities. There is no warehouse where we store it. It moves directly from one place to the other. And just like DoorDash never stores your food, it just takes it from the restaurant to your house. And so a lot of people, have to wrap their heads around that, that we have distributed as much food as many food banks, but we are not a food bank. So it's hard to put us in a bucket that people already understand, at least in the nonprofit world. And then what comes with that also is that we don't have facilities. So I'm going to be candid here. There's nothing to name. And so when we, try to position technology as a capital expense, it's very hard because you don't see it. But it's right there. And it's just as expensive to maintain as any building. And so it's kind of changing the mindset while, the philanthropic community in general has been extremely, innovative along with us in Pittsburgh. There's still, vestiges of an old way of thinking that, we have to kind of turn around and, offer the perspective of if we live in this world of technology, the social service world has to evolve towards it as well.
Great. Open it up to all of you for questions. If you wouldn't mind, as you ask your question, just to introduce yourself. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Julia, sustainability major. Where do you distribute all the food you collect to? Like, what sort of organizations?
Yeah, so this is, again, a really interesting question. So when we first started, so I don't come from the hunger world, so the only thing I know as well at that time was food banks. And so when we started, we kind of mapped out all the food banks in the city, and those were the first places we distributed food to. And very early on in the process, many points in time when we had big quantities of food, the food banks would say no. And so we were wondering, why would you say no to food? Because we have not solved food insecurity. There's many people who are still hungry. And what we realized was because 40% of food was going to waste before, this 40%, just imagine carrying out food and putting it in the garbage. We didn't have to store it. And now we're asking people to absorb this food. We're saying we're not giving it to the garbage. It's this really good food. Now we want you to distribute it. But they weren't designed to do so. And so they were saying no. So again, logistics, right? So what are we going to do? So now we have to look for non-traditional avenues of distributing food. So we started calling non-traditional places that still serve people who were experiencing poverty or food insecurities, such as community health centers, public housing sites. That's the most direct way to people. And of course, when you offer people free food, to give to the people they serve, they say yes. And so we've created this now huge network of distribution that didn't exist before, which, what happens is now we have thousands, hundreds in Pittsburgh, thousands in the 25 cities we're in. It doubled the coverage of the food banking network. And people are closer to food now than they ever were before. So we work with everyone, basically, that, will be able to distribute food to people in need.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Haley. I'm also a sustainability major. I guess this is kind of a question for both of you, but is Chatham like a part of this organization?
Yeah.
Okay.
Chatham was one of the first universities that worked with us. We've had many, many interns from Chatham. So it continues to this day.
And just, I know we only had one say that you wanted to start your own organization, but actually Chatham's relationship with 412 started from a single student. So she came up with the idea as part of her capstone project that it's not just the Giant Eagles and the Trader Joe's and the restaurants that it's waste, but what about all of our food services? And so she came up with the idea, not just for Chatham, but for CMU and Pitt and others to say, can we get that food there? Now, when it started, there was a thing, which is how quick tech evolves, right? There was a thing called Zipcar.
Oh, yeah.
That
we were using Zipcars, yeah.
We had Zipcars on campus. And so what it meant was not only were we using the foods, but students who didn't have a car, they could just get a Zipcar and get it to where it needed. So we had a pause because everything obviously got changed with the pandemic, but we've restarted that. And so we're actually looking for local food heroes. So if any of you are intrigued with the model, it's easy to download the app and we can work with our food service so you can do a pickup from here and get it to places where it would be needed.
Hello, I'm Marissa, Sustainability Business. I wanted to ask two questions. What are the main problems that you and your team face on a day-to-day basis? And then, if you could answer, what does your day look like?
My day. Well,
So just to repeat, because Marissa didn't have a mic, so just asking, what does your day look like, typically, if you have one? And what are the sort of the biggest day-to-day operational challenges for your team?
Right. So the pandemic totally changed work life for a lot of people. So for us too. So we came from working remotely to working hybrid and just this whole kind of, I think what everyone is figuring out now, what is the right balance? And I don't think we have an answer yet. Because half our organization are software engineers who, in that industry works very much remotely, whereas the other half, a lot of it is needing to be hands-on. So it's culturally, that's, I think, one of our biggest challenges right now, and we don't have an answer yet. And I think it's going to continue to evolve, and we won't know the implications of that, until maybe a couple of years from now. I don't know.
And I think that's true for every employer.
Yes,
right now.
absolutely. And for those of us maybe that have been used to being in the office and loving the water cooler conversation or the quick 5-minute talk, or for creatives that feel like the energy, creative energy has to be there and have that exchange. For me personally, it's a little bit harder. I mean, I would never go back to fully, 9 to 5, but it's again, that's the biggest challenge. How do you now work with the same innovative bent, the same fast-paced? We were an extremely fast-paced team, still is, but how do you now maintain that in this new work environment? My day is not very interesting. I'm an administrator, if you can imagine, and I'm constantly in meetings, which is again a consequence of this Zoom world, right? A 5-minute, what would have been a 5-minute conversation is now a 30-minute slot in your calendar, which is not necessary. Or having many events, or at least events that you go to where you can talk to President Feingold and say, can we partner? Yeah. And you can finish that conversation in that one event where you cross paths, is now, again, another meeting, right? And you lose all of those more informal kind of things that hasten, innovation, really. And I don't think we've quantified that.
Yeah.
I'm Quinn. I'm an exercise science major.
And a what?
Exercise science.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm misquoting, but at the beginning I think you said we have enough calories to feed the world 4 times over. Is that correct?
Yes.
Does that also remain true on like a micronutrient level, do you believe?
So, yes. So 52% of food that goes to waste is actually fresh produce. So you can imagine we're letting all of these things go. And that, typical food that is accessible at food banks are processed. And so if we can find a way to get these 52% fresh produce to those in need, then we wouldn't have the vicious cycle of, accessing food support and then, having negative implications on your health.
And this, for the sustainability majors here that will know, but this happens at every point in the value chain. So it's happening, where it's grown. This is the ugly CSA, right? If they're not the ideal things that Giant Eagle and Whole Foods are looking for, it's happening in the supply chain to it, happening in people in the U.S. at least buying, right, way more than they're consuming, right, and then the prepared foods and other things. So it's, as you say, it's a logistics challenge across the whole of the thing.
Right, and my interest in food came from my interest in health in general. So.
You mentioned you grew up in the Philippines and the high poverty rate there. Mm-hmm. You've scaled this in the U.S. Do you see, is there a potential for this around the world? Are you seeing imitators or others doing this model or looking to replicate what you've done in other countries?
Yeah, so in India, there's this a nonprofit called Robin Hood. And you can imagine the scale it can go in India by itself. So there are models like this, in developing countries as well.
So, one of the things, obviously, Chatham, with our history, we've always been very interested in gender issues. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, in your experience, how you think your approach to leadership, do you see differences between how the different genders approach it? And when you've looked at different role models, you mentioned David Shapiro, right? His daughter now is running Giant Eagle, and so there's been a transition there. I'm curious how you've observed it, not just for your organization, but in your different jobs and how you've approached it.
Right, yeah. One of my first jobs after grad school was actually at this organization called Catalyst, and they are one of the biggest leaders in advocating for female leadership in the C-suite for Fortune 500 corporations. So, we all know it's been documented that, more diverse leadership, more diverse team, contributes to better bottom lines. It's been fully measured. That's unquestionable. I think for me, in terms of my own leadership, I'm not quite as conscious of gender as I go about my day. I do think that it's also been documented that most social enterprises are started by women. So there is a drive for more than a single bottom line. I think what I do know about gender is, and what I do notice more succinctly in my daily work, is that it's no secret on the other side that only 5% of venture capital goes to female founders. That's that has parallels in, it doesn't matter whether it's for profit or nonprofit. And in the nonprofit world, there's a ceiling, a size ceiling for female executive directors. And I think that's a 5 million mark. So there is a lot of still that whole movement in terms of, and the whole need to equalize, participation, everywhere from technology to business to the nonprofit world.
And I'm curious, you said that, when you came out, you had a very different path in mind. You didn't set out to do this, but it sounds like many of your experiences helped lead to it. If you think about what's made you successful in creating and then really scaling this organization, what were the prior experiences that you've found most helpful in kind of building, the capabilities you needed to be successful in this role?
Yeah, so I really credit my first job. I worked for Colgate-Palmolive. I was a brand manager there. And when you're a brand manager, you're essentially responsible for a P&L. So for the business majors, you're basically running your own company. And every discipline that I learned there, I've traded on my entire life since. So, if you don't have an entrepreneurial idea or don't feel like you don't have to. There's so much to learn, and there's so much need for entrepreneurs, right? For you to work within a corporation and be the innovator in there. And so that, because it was all about how to sell something, how to make you buy a certain toothpaste, a certain hair care product. What was fascinating about that job is that we studied people as closely as you can't even imagine how closely we study people. And it's all about human behavior. When you get that Instagram ad, it's because they know you, and when you grab that brand, it's because they know you. And for me, that was jarring and interesting. And so it's almost like a superpower, but you also, in that sense, you want to use that superpower for good, right? And we apply that to this day. It's all about understanding what drives people to do things. How do we get 35,000, 350,000 people to download the app and do a rescue? What drives them? What do we say? So that's always been something, and it's with whatever you do, and empathy for people is something that you're going to need. And then, just the discipline of, I would say, the technology world, right? Because it can move so quickly. Moore's Law, I don't know if it's still true or if it's, accelerated even more, like the processors double in 18 months. It's a world that moves extremely fast. And now we're in Web3 and the metaverse, and us Gen Xers can't even wrap our heads around what is this? It's a completely different world. So it's just, I think having that constant malleability of your brain to keep up with what technology has to offer is also something that is extremely important.
I'm curious, when I was sort of thinking about careers and growing up, there tended to be a very clear line between for-profits and nonprofits. And one of the things that I think is really exciting as our students think about careers and where things are now is there's a real blurring of lines. So you mentioned social enterprises, right? There's a lot of for-profit companies that are B Corps that have set up where they're not just trying to maximize profits and shareholder returns, but their governance says, we're here to provide a broader societal benefit. And so this notion of triple bottom lines and thinking broadly. When you were thinking about solving these twin issues of food waste and hunger, did you look at, is this better done as a nonprofit or as like a B Corp or a,
Yeah.
a self-sustaining, a company that would generate enough profit to keep it going, but address the same issue.
Yeah. So the challenge for us internally has always been, irrespective of nonprofit or for-profit, is how can we sustain ourselves with revenue, and that's still a challenge for us. And we do have a path to that, and that's always been kind of the standard that we've tried to hold ourselves, and it's happening. I mean, what's interesting is that Uber is not profitable. And they've been existing for 15 years now. So so the designation of for-profit and nonprofit is not necessarily, in my mind, relevant anymore. It's really, are you internally sustaining yourself? Is your financial model, does it aim to, actually generate enough, returns so that you're not dependent on independent forces, I would say.
And so, for those who are not as familiar with that, right? So you've got Uber, which is 15 years and is still relying on its investors to keep it going. And then here in town, right, you have UPMC, which is the largest employer in Pennsylvania, makes over $5 billion a year, but is a nonprofit,
yeah.
right? So it means their status is such that they're not giving that money to shareholders, but so there's a really big spectrum there.
Yeah.
Other questions folks have for Leah? Can you share what you see for yourself as some of your greatest strengths and the areas you've had to work on as a leader?
Yeah. So I think one of the things I value about myself, and I can only say this because I'm much older now, wouldn't have known, is I think really I'm just eternally curious. I just always want to learn. I'm always wanting to know, I'm always trying to understand. And I think that desire and that curiosity is what opens up a lot of things for people. It opens up everything, right? Yeah, so I think that's the thing that I hope that everyone has. Whatever it is that you pursue in life, is that you maintain kind of a sense of curiosity, and you will never be bored. I always tell my kids, I'm never bored. I don't understand what bored means, because there's always something interesting.
You mentioned your kids, so
Yeah.
how have you found it to found, run, build an organization like this and juggle that with family? Because that's one of the real challenges, right, that we're facing now.
Yeah, and I'm extremely privileged to have an actual, like, a village, so there's family that helps. My mother, I imported her from the Philippines so she can help me, and yeah, it's I don't know how to do it. I don't know how people would do it otherwise. So I do recognize, the extremely privileged situation I'm in, having enough help.
And you mentioned the curiosity as being one of the great kind of strengths and things you're trying to instill. Were there things that you found, you mentioned you wish you'd paid more attention in the organization development course. Are there things where you've really had to learn this whole other thing to make this work that you didn't have when you started out?
Right. So I think it's there's a lot of things that you can pay attention to at school, which you should, but there's also, I think there's also a lot of need for everyone to kind of be self-directed. So you will only learn from your subjects as much as you want to learn. So I encourage you to really, once you kind of have an idea or an understanding, and I'm not maybe the best advice in this, although I do, will credit my undergrad for a lot of things now, but pick subjects that you're actually kind of interested in or are very interested in, and really give it your all. Not necessarily maybe to pass the test, but really to understand certain things. And that's what's going to net you the most after you leave Chatham.
And I'd just like to conclude with, if you're thinking about lessons for students as they're thinking about their own careers, if they either want to think about starting their own organization, whether a nonprofit or a company, or they're really passionate about, one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals or another pressing social problem that we see, what when you look back on what you've done in your career, what would you draw as lessons to offer them in terms of thinking about how to best go about that with that, first job after Chatham, and what they might do subsequently?
Yeah, I think if I was going to look back at myself at this stage, what I would kind of tell myself is that no decision you'll make right now is final. It's nothing. It's not. Nothing is final. You may think you're in exercise science, but 5 years later, you decide to be completely somewhere else. That's okay. It's okay. I think the only thing that I would, always encourage my kids to do is that whatever you're doing at the moment, make sure you're interested. And that will vastly improve the quality of your life. You will spend at least 8 hours a day doing your job. And if, it's find something that, not necessarily like your passion, something that you're interested in. And if it's not the thing you feel like is your final thing, try to understand what you want to gain from it at this point in your life, at this point in time. And then once you realize what's next, you will be able to build on that. And you might not see it at that time, but because you did try to get as much out of it and were genuinely giving something, then I can assure you that that's only going to kind of snowball as you move on through life.
Well, please join me in thanking Leah for sharing her journey and wisdom with us. We're finishing a few minutes early, so if anyone has any specific questions or things you'd like to come up, maybe you could take a couple minutes.
Yeah.
But thanks all for being here. We have the next session October 20th with Jerry Cohen, who was the president for nearly 20 years of Carnegie Mellon, helped take it to being one of the world's top technical universities. So hopefully see you all then. Thank you.